In this video, we're going to talk about vector displacement map brushes, or VDM brushes. Vector displacement brushes allow us to create very complicated surfaces using a single brush. For example, on this Covid Demoni sculpture, I had originally worked out an idea where I wanted there to be these toothy tentacles growing out of these lungs. Now, it's not something I ended up going with in the final design, but I did go through the process of creating a brush to achieve that look. This is the sculpture that I used to create that brush. A vector displacement map brush is generated from a sculpture that is derived from a single polygon plane. So here you can see we've got this long wrinkled tentacle with these mandible teeth on the ends, sort of reminiscent of Rob Bottin's creature for the film Deep Rising. So I want to create a brush that generates these shapes, and that I did exactly. So let's take a look. I'm going to show you how I generate a brush from this, and then I'll show you how we can create our own. So I've got this polygon plane. If I step down my subdivision levels to level 1, you can see that it's very, very low resolution. The base of the plane remains square. Step back up to my highest subdivision level, and we get all of our detail back, and you'll see it's actually 16 million polygons in this plane. So if I want to generate a vector displacement brush from this, I need to go to my brush menu and go to C for chisel, and I will select the chisel creature brush. So we can do chisel 3D or chisel creature. If I grab chisel 3D, you see I get these brushes here. There's also chisel creature. So I'm going to use chisel 3D as long as it's a chisel-based brush. Now you see that these brushes have a variety of planes like this associated with it already. There's eyes and ears and noses, and these are all very complicated protruding surfaces. That's the vector portion of the displacement brush. Most displacement mapping is done with a grayscale map or an alpha. It's shades of gray from white to black, and those can either push out or in. A vector displacement map, on the other hand, is RGB. It has 3 values, and that can be pushing around a 90-degree angle, so you can get very complex shapes like this. So I'm going to orient it on screen, and with the Chisel 3D brush selected, I will go to Brush, from Mesh, and that will create a new instance in this selection of brushes that are associated, or alphas, vector displacement brushes that are associated with this brush. It's very similar to when you store an insert multi-mesh brush. It'll just append it to the list of potential meshes that you can add with this brush. So here you can see we've got the tentacle. So we go back to our lungs on Covid Demoni. Now I just have the lung geometry selected, and as I was saying, I thought it would be interesting if these tentacles were to grow out of this lung geometry. Now the lungs are 3 million faces, and this is a very complex surface. So the denser you can get the Z-tool, the better quality you will get from the displacement. But we're going to go ahead and draw one out right now, and there you go. You see we get a very nice overall displacement with a lot of that detail captured in that brush. We get some stretching here, and that's just down to the fact that we have really pushed the length of the brush out, and we've just run out of geometry because it's basically drawing this shape out of this existing polygon volume. So if I make the brush a bit smaller, it's stretching those polygons not quite as far. So I can put one of these tentacles there. I can put one here. Maybe we'll put another one here. And I can drag and rotate them as I draw them. So I can position them. I've got the ability to position them as I go. So there you can see what we get from that. And I can draw them small, like so. And I can draw them larger. But as I said, the larger you draw them, the further you're stretching the geometry, so the more mesh you need. If we go to the polysphere, this polysphere is 24,000 faces. I will divide this up to 6 million polygons. So right now it's 1.5. We add one more subdivision level. That is 6 million faces. Now that's 7 subdivision levels. Now, if I click and drag, I can draw a single instance of that tentacle. I can draw another larger one, and because we've got enough geometry, it can stretch that out quite far and maintain that detail. You see all that detail is still there in our mesh. Now, we don't have to just use the drag rectangle stroke. Something that's interesting to do on these is to change to a spray stroke, for example. I like to take things like, let's say, for example, if we switch over to Chisel Creature, we have some other brushes available in here. There's a teeth brush right there. I'll change this to a spray stroke, and this gives you a real creepy effect where it sort of scatters these teeth on a surface. So you could do something like this to create sort of spines or boils or any sort of interesting kind of shape like that. Now, I can change the placement. Oops, there we go. I can open my stroke controls and I can change the placement here. I can increase that, and now they'll be spread out more so they're not so clustered together. And if I change that even higher, I'll turn my draw size down a bit. Go over here to an unused portion of this mesh, and then you see we get them drawn out much larger. Turn off lazy mouse, and then I can get more of a sort of, I can just tap my brush to sort of stipple out some of these shapes. So it's a very, very creepy sort of surface that we can create there. And that's just on a standard subdivision level. So if I go to frame mode, you can see there's my mesh, step down, we still have our subdivision levels. It's just using a brush with a vector displacement map alpha. That's the difference. And it's noted here that it is a, quote, 3D alpha. Now, there are also 3D alphas in ZBrush, which are grayscale images. So be aware of that. Those function differently, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's go back to our original 6 million polygon sphere here. Turn off frame mode. Now, something that's interesting about these vector displacement brushes is that you can easily kit bash an entire character just using these pieces and parts. So if I turn on X symmetry here, we can take the horns. We draw to, oops, make sure that we change back to our drag rectangle stroke. So I'm going to undo that and go back to our drag rectangle stroke. We can drag out 2 horns here. Decide on their position and then let go. Now we can do nostrils. Let's put 2 nostrils on here. We can orient them as we like. Maybe we'll change the direction of them like this. Or maybe we'll get a completely different nose. Let's say, for example, here, oh, that's a scale. Let's go to this nose here. Now what I like to do is bring the 2 dots together and then turn off X symmetry. Just having the 2 dots there lets me know for sure that I'm at the center of the mesh. Here we've got eyes. I can grab an eye and then turn on X symmetry. We can bring these 2 eyes together. Maybe I'll bring these up here. We'll draw our eyes like this. If we go to the ears, we have a variety of different ear options. We can draw ears on here as well. And I quite like it when the 2 brushes sort of interact, or the surfaces interact with the previously drawn brushes. You can get an interesting sort of reaction there. Now you can also have a whole lot of like negative space inside of these brushes. If I go back to the Chisel 3D brush, here we've got some mouths that have a lot of depth in them. So if we go over here, there I've got a mouth that has an entire mouth bag in there. So let's go ahead and bring the 2 dots together, turn off X symmetry, and then click and drag. Zoom in so we can see that a bit better. Click and drag, and we get that whole mouth there. Now, as I'm drawing it, if I hold the Shift key, I can snap it so it stays oriented upright, or I can let go and I can freehand orient that shape. So look at that. We have the entire negative space of the interior of the mouth in there. Now we also have animal noses. We have things like the dog nose here and what looks like a creature mouth, a sea anemone of some kind. Dog nose here with the associated fine texture detail on there. We have eyes like this, which are more sort of toon-styled eyes. And you see how much negative space there is there. This would not be possible with an alpha. An alpha could just give you what you see right here looking directly down. You get a ledge and that circle. But a vector displacement map allows you to go in there and create compound, complex shapes that curve back upon themselves. So let's undo that. Great. Now, these are all pulling out of this volume. This is not Dynamesh. This is existing on a subdivision sphere, but that doesn't mean you can't use these on a Dynamesh mesh. You absolutely can. That's not an issue as long as your Dynamesh resolution is high enough that it will support the details that you're trying to capture from these brushes. So let's take a look at how we do these. How do we make our own vector displacement map brushes? So as I showed you before, this is sculpted from a polygon sphere. It's just a polygon, or excuse me, this is sculpted from a polygon plane. It's just a simple polyplane inside of ZBrush. Now, this polyplane, you can access, well, you can access it anywhere in ZBrush as long as it's got planar and planar UVs on there. But the easiest way to do it is to go to your projects folder under Lightbox, and under projects, go to miscellaneous. Inside the miscellaneous projects folder, you will find Brush 3D Template PG. That's Brush 3D Template Polygroup. Double click that, and this is a project, so it will get rid of everything else that's open in your scene. Go into frame mode, and you'll see what we have here is a polygon plane where there's a polygroup around the outermost border. That's important. That polygroup is going to make your life a lot easier because when you're sculpting a vector displacement brush, you do not want to affect the outermost corners of this polyplane because that's going to be your blending edge. So this polygroup there makes it very easy to Control-Shift-Click and isolate that so you're not going to sculpt on it. Then you can show it again and you can get your polyplane back. Now, if you had inadvertently altered the border, you could isolate it and then go to geometry, or go to, excuse me, deformation. And here you've got morph to grid. So you can turn morph to grid back up and it will bring that back to its original grid shape. So this is the surface upon which we will sculpt our vector displacement map brush. So let's go ahead and go to our geometry menu. See that we've got we're at subdivision level 2 right now. There's actually 5 subdivision levels on this Z tool for a maximum right now of 263,000 faces, but we can and likely will subdivide that much, much higher. So let's go ahead and create a new shape. So I'll begin by masking out an area that I want to pull from this surface. Let's invert that mask, and I'm going to turn off frame mode and just step down a few subdivision levels here. Take the move brush, make sure we've got X symmetry turned on, and we're just going to go ahead and pull this out. Now, if you find that your brush doesn't get large enough, there's a little dynamic word here in the slider. If you double click that, it turns off dynamic brush sizing, and now I can pull this out. Smooth, and then let's create the basic shape here. Go into frame mode, and you see that I've got that outermost border still visible. So I'm going to clear my mask, Control-Shift-Click on this polygroup, and I'll just leave the outermost polygroup hidden so I can smooth and work into this shape. Let's go ahead and step up a couple subdivision levels. And I'm going to mask out all this. Go to side view and just click drag with Control. Invert the mask, and now I can easily scooch these shapes in. We're going to create kind of a sort of mandible shape, or a insectoid kind of protrusion, a leg of some kind. I just want to get the joint shapes in here. Now we're working with very, very low subdivision level right now, and that's fine. We're going to treat this just like we do our sculpting usually. We start from the lower forms, lower subdivision levels, and work our way up. Let's add another, or step up a subdivision level. We're up at the top of the existing subdivision levels at this point. And I'm just going to take my trim dynamic brush and start sculpting in some planes here. We're just using our regular sculpting tools. And I'm going to go ahead and clear my mask and then mask out an area for kind of a claw here. Invert that mask. Take my move brush, and I want the move brush to come to a point. So I'm going to go to the brush menu, go to curve, and turn on accurate curve mode. Now that forces the brush to follow this edit curve, so it makes it much more accurate. And you notice that it gives me a nice sharp point at the tip of that move brush. Let's get a little bit of an arc in that. Smooth that slightly, and then we'll just invert the mask. And I'll take the inflate brush, and let's inflate along that border and get a nice sort of junction there between that claw and the flesh that it's growing out of. I'll take the move brush again and just pull that back so it's sort of countersunk in there, and clear the mask, and then inflate those two forms together. Give it a little bit of smoothing. Take the damn standard brush. We'll just continue working in that division between those forms. Turn down my Z intensity, and let's just scallop this in a little bit. Give some texture to that claw. I'll turn off my X symmetry so these striations running down the length of the claw are not perfectly symmetrical, because that just sort of calls attention to itself. Symmetry always stands out in more organic shapes like this. There we go. And I'll take my clay tubes brush, and I'll turn the alpha off, and I'll take my focal shift, and I'll turn that to about -8. And this gives me a nice fall off on the brush. So I'm going to go ahead and build up. Oops, let's undo that, undo that, undo that. There we go. Let's build up this knuckle form here. Over here, we'll do the same thing here. I just want to get a sense of that anatomical structure along there. We'll hold down the Alt key on the clay tubes brush so we can knock back a plane there and smooth that back. And on the underside, I'll take the damn standard brush and create a little bit of a crease here. Now you see we're running out of geometry, but we're still only 200,000 faces. So I'm going to go ahead and rough in some of these shapes. I'm going to take the move brush and bring this taper in along the length of that form. And then we'll add a subdivision level because we're at our top subdivision level right now. I'll press Control D. Now I have that outermost border hidden, so I need to Control Shift click on the background to show all again and make sure that my masking is cleared. And now I should be able to add another subdivision level, which brings me up to 1,000,000 polygons. Go to my clay tubes brush, and then just continue working onto these knuckles, down the back of this joint here. And I think I'll take the masking brush and I'll mask out this fingertip. Invert that mask, and I'll go to W for move and turn off the transpose gizmo so we get a transpose line. Now, if you don't know how to use the transpose line, there's a whole chapter on transpose and posing where we talk about this in depth. So this is just an easier way, I find, to sort of stretch the shape out. Take our move brush. And then I kind of like that little happy accident there, so I'm going to keep it. I'm going to take the damn standard brush and hold down the Alt key. That gives me a little bit of a pinch along this edge here. And the damn standard brush holding the Alt key does really nice sort of planes like this. Clear the mask by Control clicking and dragging on the background. Standard brush, and we'll use Alpha 1 just to sharpen the tip of the brush, and I just want to sort of create some scalloping on the undersides of this sort of bony joint here. And I'll step down my subdivision levels, not that far. Let's step down 1 so we can do a little bit of smoothing here. Clay tubes. And again, I'm thinking about planes and plane changes here. Again, when we start to get those sort of stretched faces, don't worry too much about that yet, because again, we're still quite low in our subdivision levels. We can step back up to our higher subdiv, do a little bit of smoothing. take the move brush and I'll go back to the brush menu and turn off accurate curve mode because I don't need it to be so so isolated and so strong now and so pointed, I should say. Smooth this, get rid of those artifacts there. And I'll go back to my damn standard brush and create some wrinkling here. So I'm just going to sculpt some wrinkles around the sides here. And maybe I want to incorporate some of these wrinkles into the base. So when I draw this shape out, it has some texture that can help integrate it into the surface around it so it doesn't just come out of nothing. I'm going to turn off my X symmetry here at the center line because that's where it will be very, very apparent if you've got symmetry turned on. And I'm just creating some cross-hatching wrinkles here. I'm going to turn my symmetry back on the sides. Maybe on the underside here, we'll keep that symmetry on so we can create these wrinkles here. And I'm going to add another subdivision level with Control D. And turn off X symmetry. And we're just going to crisscross the bottom here with some wrinkling. Clay Tubes brush. Hold down the Alt key so we can knock these shapes back a little bit, get rid of that noise down there using Clay Tubes brush. We're really pushing the limits by stretching this out so far. As you saw in those other brushes, some of them, they're really just sort of noses and ears. You can bring things out quite far and you can push things in quite deep. I'm really trying to push them with this tentacle brush and this joint, this finger brush here, just to show sort of the full extent of what you can accomplish. We can divide this up probably another time too. So, and also as I'm rotating, that's just the quick draw mode. It will drop down the subdivision levels for speed of manipulation as you're rotating. So that's why we end up with that that faceting as we're moving around. That's not actually in the brush. Turn on my X symmetry. Get some nice wrinkling through here. Take a look at what we've got. I'll go to the standard brush with Alpha 1, and let's just sort of build up some of these wrinkling shapes here. Turn off my X symmetry so we can get asymmetrical buckles of skin along here. I'll go to the standard brush and select Alpha 58. Turn my Z intensity down, and this is a nice wrinkle brush. It's one of my favorite ZBrush pre-installed brushes. It just creates this really nice wrinkling texture. And I'm going to just crisscross this back and forth along the surface. Bring it down here. Go into frame mode so I can make sure that that polygroup is there. And I'm going to Control-Shift-Click to isolate that polygroup so I don't run the risk of actually sculpting on top of it. So here I'm going to bring some of that texture down into the base. So there's a nice transition between the shape that's being pulled out of the surface when we use this brush and the surface that it's growing from. And I'm holding down the Alt key and just making circular patterns with this brush to create a nice cross-hatch skin texture. This brush is particularly well suited for skin by its design because it creates these little waffling crosshatch patterns when you make these circular strokes. It's definitely a great brush. And it's been in ZBrush for quite a long time. Clay Tubes brush. Let's knock back this shape here. Get a little bit more structure in this area. Damn standard brush. And the standard brush with Alpha 1. Turn up my Z intensity on that a bit more. We had turned that down for the wrinkle alpha, but I want to have it a little bit higher for these details we're putting in here. And let's go back to Alpha 58. Hold down the Alt key, and that's a little too strong, but we know, let's leave it at that strength. And what we'll do is we'll just sculpt that in and then run the smooth brush along it just to take back some of the tooth on that, make it a little less intense. We'll do the same thing here, bring these wrinkles over here and then just touch that with the smooth brush to knock it back a little bit. and dial back my Z intensity. And hit it with the smooth brush. So here you see that we've sculpted this sort of claw shape. Snap to a side view and turn off perspective mode. And I'll go ahead and mask out the tip here. Let's mask it out to about here. And actually, no, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to mask it to about here. Step down a couple subdivision levels and control click to feather the mask, invert it, and I'll go to my transpose line again. And I can rotate this if need be. I can take the outermost circle, go to move, W for move. I can stretch that out. I can draw this line again and go to rotate, R for rotate, and if I alt-click this circle, I can bend that joint. So if you're not familiar with these tools yet, be sure to watch the video that I recorded on transpose and posing, because we talk about the transpose line and the transpose gizmo in depth. So there's a lot of things that you can do like this, which are usually used for posing, but are very, very valuable when you're sculpting as well. So let me go back to my standard brush and just put a little bit more detail along the length of this. I'm going to turn my draw size up and then make some big wrinkle shapes here. Turn my Z intensity up. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. And then just smooth that. Smooth that. Oops, actually, I don't like those. I'm going to undo that. And step down my subdivision levels. Go to clay tubes, and I just want to fix that little indentation there along the claw. And I'll go to the, let's do polish. Let's do the polish brush. And let's polish this claw surface so it's a little bit smoother. It'd be a nice contrast between the claw and that skin. There we go. Let's go to the underside of that, get that nice and polished. Step back up our subdivision levels. The polish brushes work really well when you've got a lot of geometry to work with. Bring that to a point. Let's go ahead and step down and let's smooth this out to sort of correct that little pinch there. And we'll take the move brush and give that a little bit of curvature. Step back up to our highest subdivision level. And I'll go in with my damn standard brush. And I like making these little sorts of holes here. It's kind of a neat little surface detail thing that I just like the look of it. It kind of comes from sea life, crustaceans. Just kind of a neat little scalloping shape there. I just want to put that little detail in there. And I'm all right that we've lost our striations down the length of that claw. I think it's a nice bit of contrast there not to have those. I'll go back to the standard brush with Alpha 1, and let's just build up a little bit of detail here. Turn off our X symmetry so that's not totally symmetrical. And I just want to make this surface contrast with that nice smooth claw. So we get this wrinkly, fleshy surface here against that bony claw surface. So there we go. Control-Shift-Click on the background, and that will reveal all the polygroup that we have hidden. Now, I want to capture this as a brush. Now, I could mask this area and then work on just the background plane here to fix any sort of transition going into the plane. But what I want to do before that is I want to make sure that I save my work. So we want to save our sculpted plane as a Z tool. That will allow us to come back to it later and make edits to it. And you can extract details from brushes, but it's best, I think, to have these saved as a plane. So you can always just go back to it in its original Z tool form without having to extract it out of the brush. So I'm just going to go to Save Tool, or Save As, and we'll save this, and I will make this available to you in the downloads for this particular lesson. So let's go ahead and orient our claw on screen. Control-Shift-Click on the background to make sure that the polygroup is shown that we had previously hidden around the border. Now we want to make our brush. So I will go to the brush menu and I will select Chisel 3D or Chisel Creature. Either one, they're both chisel based. I've selected Chisel Creature here. There's our tentacle from earlier. Now I will go to Brush, from Mesh, and ZBrush will generate a vector displacement map brush. Now, if you have sculpted from a plane, ZBrush knows to create a vector displacement map brush from that mesh. And I mention that because when we do 3D alphas, it's a similar process, but ZBrush is not going to store a vector displacement map brush. It will only store a VDM brush if you have sculpted your form from a polyplane. Okay, so there's our claw. Let's go ahead and go to our Lightbox tool menu, and let's open up a polysphere. We'll divide the polysphere up. Let's go ahead and just make some tweaks to it. I'll open up the gizmo, and let's turn the gizmo back on, and we'll squash this, stretch this, maybe squash it like this. And we'll go to the gizmo deformers, and let's do the bend curve. I'll delete my lower subdivision levels, and again, go to bend curve, and make sure that it's going down the correct axis. So let's change our axis here. Increase our resolution, and then we'll just grab some of these points and sort of move them around. We can create an interesting base for our creature here. There we go. And I'll divide this up until we have at least 1 million polygons, but I'm going to bring this up to 6. Turn on X symmetry, and I've got my brush selected here, and I click and drag, and it starts to draw those claws out. And you can see that we can very quickly start to create a nice little creepy crawly based on these, or using these claws that we just created. So that's pretty interesting. Let's undo that. And we'll do them again. I'm going to start growing them down a little bit lower. So we'll bring these like this, and we'll bring these down like this. Now, as I overshoot, you see that it starts to deform the surface. So I need to make sure that I only draw them so far that they will not end up interacting with one another and deforming the surface. So if I bring them too close together like this, they start to stretch. If I keep them out on the sides like this, we're fine until they start to interact with one another. So we'll do this and make them smaller as they go down. And we can create a real nice, creepy kind of creature here. Let's go ahead and transform this. Let's rotate it down so it's flat like so. And while we're at it, we can grab some other pieces and parts here. Let's go to the Chisel 3D brush again. And from Chisel 3D, we can grab, like we did that mouth. We can grab a mouth here and just place a mouth on our creature, like so. And as I said before, your X symmetry can actually cause problems. So I will bring the two dots together and turn off X, and then we can just draw a face like that, a single instance of that brush, but we know that it's centered. So that's pretty creepy. Let's go back to the undo history, to the beginnings of the sphere, and let's just divide this up again. And we'll divide it up to 6 million polygons and turn on our X symmetry. And this time I'll go to transform, and I'll turn on Z symmetry radial. So now I've got radial symmetry, and I can click and drag. Oops, I've got the wrong brush selected. Go back to our claws, and I can click and drag these claws like that. Well, that's interesting. That's our tentacle. But that's a great example there where you can take those and draw them out. So let's combine those together. I'll go back to Chisel 3 Creature, where I stored my claw that we just did, and we can do these here. Maybe we'll draw these claws like this. And just even that in and of itself is pretty creepy as we're moving them around. So we can draw sort of a very creepy, crawly claw beast here. Let's draw some more of these out here and make sure they're oriented so they're facing forward like that. And let's draw another set here. There we go. Very quickly we're able to build up a very effective and disturbing monster just using 2 vector displacement map brushes. So hopefully you've enjoyed this demonstration of vector displacement map brushes, and you can start to create your own. It's a lot of fun, and it's good practice to sculpt these sorts of shapes out of a polygon plane. And it's, a wonderful tool to have in your arsenal. You can have a variety of these that you keep around for different types of facial features or body features, or even environmental or architectural features. There's really no limit. If you can sculpt it, you can create a vector displacement map brush from it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.